everyone, welcome to the December 2nd edition of the TimeformUS forecast. I'm David Aragona, here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski as we are back from a little bit of a hiatus. Craig and I decided to take a few weeks off after the Breeders' Cup, just feeling that burnout towards the end of the season. So we want to bring you the best content possible, so we're just going to take a few weeks off towards the end of the year. But we didn't want to miss the opportunity to talk about this last major day of Grade 1 racing in New York. Of course, Cigar Mile Day, this first Saturday in December. They're running 4 graded stakes at Aqueduct on Saturday, Craig, and got some interesting races to talk about. Obviously, the Cigar Mile didn't draw the biggest or deepest field for that race, but we do have some up-and-coming 2-year-olds in action in the Demoiselle and the Remsen, and a seemingly wide-open edition of the Gopher Wand.
It's a decent card for sure, particularly from a betting aspect. It does seem like there's a trend where after the Breeders' Cup, we're not really seeing many horses run back in these graded races. We saw that in Kentucky last week. We're seeing it here in Aqueduct. But I still think from a betting perspective, they're fine. I'm looking forward to this card, and I'll certainly be watching and betting these races that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I'm always a little surprised that other connections don't take advantage of the opportunity to get a Grade 1 victory going a mile at the end of the year. But sometimes people just they don't want to continue on after the Breeders' Cup. And there are some horses out there that I think could have benefited for their Eclipse credentials racing in a race like this, but they've chosen not to. We'll get to the Cigar Mile towards the end of the podcast. We are, of course, going to discuss the Pick 5 sequence at Aqueduct, comprising races 6 through 10, all 4 graded stakes races, and finishing up with a pretty decent starter allowance race that closes out the day in the 10th. But we're going to begin things with race 6. It is the Grade 2 Demoiselle, this one for the 2-year-old fillies, going the 1.125 distance on the main track around 2 turns. And Craig, we kind of just finished up recording a video for DRF's YouTube channel about this race, and I know we were kind of talking about how stamina could be a real factor in the outcome here, because it seems like there are some fillies that are certainly bred to go longer, but most of them have not gone this far yet.
Right. There is definitely a few horses I think will appreciate the distance, some that will not so much. And as I mentioned in our preview video, a 1.125 at Aqueduct is particularly demanding as the track has been slow these last couple years. Now, it hasn't been as slow lately as it is over the winter on some occasions where it's just really glacial times, but it is a demanding surface.
For sure, and takes a 2-year-old that really has both some constitution and also the pedigree foundation to get these longer distances. And you probably have that with the number 3, Julia Scheidinger. That's the way that I would imagine a lot of handicappers are going to view her, because, of course, she is that younger full sister to Malathot out of that excellent mare Dreaming of Julia. And Malathot, of course, was the Demoiselle winner during her 2-year-old season. I think she went 3 for 3 as a 2-year-old. So Julia Shining looking to follow in her older sister's footsteps here as she makes her second career start here. And I've got to be honest, Craig, when I saw her break her maiden at Keeneland, and obviously it was visually impressive. She made that big looping move from off the pace. But I saw the speed figure come back slow just as everybody else did, and I kind of said to myself, oh, this is a horse I probably want to bet against when she shows up in the Demoiselle, just kind of assuming this race comes up as strong as it normally does. But when I got down to handicapping this race and looking at who showed up in the field, she doesn't look quite as slow comparatively to this field as I expected she would.
I was expecting the same thing. I was kind of licking my chops and reaching into my wallet in anticipation of being totally against her, which I'm not. She reminded me of that horse in California whose name I'm not going to remember, who closed from way back and won at a short price, and everybody loved her, and then she lost in her stakes debut. But I can't quite view Julia Shining that same way because, as you said, the competition didn't really turn up. There's some decent fillies in here. And on our preview video, I went with a couple different horses over her, but that was merely from a value perspective. I certainly think she's the most likely winner and the horse to beat.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about her debut race. She just seemed like a horse that lacked some early speed and also lacked some focus on the backstretch. I mean, it's not like she broke that slowly from the gate, but you could tell she wasn't reacting that well to the kickback. She was climbing down the backstretch, just striding awkwardly, but once they got her out of the kickback and into the clear, that's when she really kicked it into high gear for Luis Saez, and they finished off the race so impressively. And while it did earn a pretty modest 82 TimeformUS speed figure, a little bit faster on the Beyer scale. We have seen some horses that finished behind her come back and run okay in their subsequent starts. The runner-up, Positano Sunset, came back to win with a slightly faster speed figure on the TimeformUS scale, a much faster Beyer speed figure. So there's some evidence that race might have been a little bit stronger than it seemed at the time. And just given the pedigree and also just the visual impression of the way she ran, she's got this big loping stride. She's a horse that doesn't even look like she's fully filled out yet. She's kind of more of a frame than a well-developed filly at this point, and it just seems like one that really does have upside. So, I mean, I know I'm talking up a very short price, but I kind of do expect her to run well here.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about the speed figure is the runner-up ran back. She only ran an 86. It's not from an 80 when she was runner-up. It's not like she exploded. Just kind of normal improvement for 2-year-olds. The third-place finisher was third in that same run and basically the same speed figure. So I think the figure nails it. I just don't know how much applicability it has to this race at 1 1/8. I guess I should get into a couple of the others I was looking at because I'm not going to single Julia Shining. If I was, I'd probably play the pick 4 because don't really see a point in starting off a sequence like this with a horse who's probably going to be the morning line UTAB 3 to 5. I think there's a couple other interesting horses in here. I'll start with Rodolphe Brosset's very similar horse in Royal Spa, one who broke last, not like Julia Shining did, but definitely broke glass when she leapt a bit in the air. Slower race, she only got a 68 speed figure, 71 final time, but I really did like the way she finished off that race. Now, the trainer doesn't have a big sample size with horses like this, coming off a win, moving from a maiden special weight to a 2 stakes company. I think he was 0 for 8, but he had several hit the board, so I don't want to dismiss her on that. She would certainly have to improve, but like you said, it's not like horses in here have been running 90s and 95 speed figures. It's not a huge jump to the rest of the group.
Yeah, I definitely see the upside with her. Everything you said about her first race is true, and she's one that certainly can move forward. I mean, she is coming back in just 15 days, so there's not a lot of time between starts here for her to make that jump, and it's a pretty significant stretch out from 6.5 furlongs all the way out to 1 1/8. Her pedigree, for me, it's not quite as convincing as Julia Shining's is to go the distance, but she's going to be a much better price. The kind of difficulty I had with her, and it's the same difficulty I have with a lot of other horses in this race, is the speed figure is just really light. I mean, if we're going to talk about Julia Shining being slow, if you look at that day at Churchill that Royal Spa ran, it's actually the same day that Positano Sunset, the horse that Julia Shining beat, came back to win her next start, and that was the much faster division of that maiden race than what Royal Spa ran in. So I question the quality of the field she's coming out of, but I don't want to be too hard on a horse that probably is going to be a much better price than the one that I put on top. And, Craig, there are a couple others in this race that you can make a case might do better with the distance. I know one of them is the number 5 Affirmative Lady, who's the only maiden in this field, but she's one that certainly can improve. She's by Arrogate, and I think Graham Motion is pretty savvy to run a maiden in this spot because you can definitely pick up some black type with a horse that doesn't have to improve that much to finish third in here.
She's probably, other than Julia Shining, the horse most likely to love the 9 furlongs. And I thought her last race was really interesting at Keeneland, where she actually broke really sharply in that race and was right up on the pace for probably 100, 150 yards. And then it just seemed she couldn't keep up. She was just kind of climbing a little bit down the backstretch, just didn't have that early speed. She broke well, but just couldn't keep up with the sprinters, dropped way out of it, but she actually came running pretty well in at the finish. It's not like she was absolutely flying or anything. She actually got passed for third late in that race, but I just kind of liked what I saw from her. She was wide around the turn and just seems like she's an alternative. And if we're talking about speed figures with these 2-year-olds, she's actually ran faster last time on TimeformUS with that 84 last time out, which was on one of the Breeders' Cup days, I believe. So it was a pretty solid track. I remember the speed figures were easy to make. So an 84 fits pretty nicely in here.
Yeah, I'm not against her. Affirmative lady. She'd be one of my backups in here. The other one that I would use underneath Julia Scheiding at exactas and trifectas is the number 4, La Vita Sofia. Of the two horses that are coming out of the local prep for this, the Tempted, I think most people would go in the direction of Foggy Night, just given her early speed and her experience around 2 turns. But La Vita Sofia, if you go back and watch that race, it's not, the chart callers didn't catch this for some reason, but she had real trouble around the far turn just prior to the quarter pole. For whatever reason, the apprentice, Jose Gomez, just was trying to get a little too cute, sneaking inside of the runner that was fading on the lead, and the hole just never really materialized, and he basically rode this filly right into the back of a tiring horse in front of her, and she had to badly steady at the point in the race when she was about to make her move. She was traveling really strongly prior to that and just couldn't recover from that trouble. I think she might be a little better than she looks. I know that she's another one who's light on the speed figures, but just given that trouble she had last time, I think she's going to get pretty overlooked in this race, and she's one that I do want to use mostly underneath, but as far as backups to Julia Scheiding go in a pick 5 sequence, I'd be, on very thin tickets, be going mostly towards her and Affirmative Lady.
I agree with you. That was pretty significant trouble last time, and it's kind of interesting looking at the speed figures. Her maiden win, she ran a 77 in the slop and an off the turf race. But when you just look at the running line, it looks like she regressed a little bit, but it's only 2 points. And given that trouble, I think she actually took a pretty big step forward that day. So I certainly wouldn't want to discount her here.
Let's move on to the other 2-year-old stakes on this card. For the males, it's race 7, the grade 2 Remsen, going the same 1.125 distance. And Craig, we've got a horse in this race who is coming in undefeated, looking to extend his record to 3 for 3, the number 2, Tuskegee Airman. This runner is one that I think we talked about on the TimeformUS Pacecast the last time we recorded, or maybe a couple Pacecasts ago, when he ran in that Rocky Run Stakes at Delaware, because it was his first attempt around 2 turns, and he definitely looks like the kind of runner that's not going to have problems with added distance. But my issue with Tuskegee Airman, and we talked about this on the Pacecast last time, was just the visual of that last race. It was a little odd. It seemed like he lost focus on the backstretch. He came off the bridle very early. Paco Lopez had to put him to this sort of panicky ride on the far turn, almost as if he was worried that an odds-on favorite was going to finish off the board, because he was just going backwards despite being encouraged. But at some point, he just decided, I'm in a horse race. Let me actually start running. And they got to the quarter pole, straightened out, and he was able to seal the deal and finish off that race. I have a bit of a concern, though, because he's now moving up to face what I think is a slightly tougher field, and I don't want to see a horse who's already has a couple starts under his belt showing that unprofessionalism. So he's the horse to beat in this race, but I have some reservations at a short price.
I do as well. In addition to what you mentioned, which I do remember us talking about on the Pacecast, I'm just never a fan of these horses shipping into New York at a short price, particularly when they don't have a speed figure edge, and he definitely does not have a speed figure edge. There's some others in here who have run faster, including the second choice, Arctic Arrogance, who's run actually very similar, but all things being equal, I'm always going to take the local horse over these other mid-Atlantic type shippers in a race like this.
Yeah, I think that you make a good point about Tuskegee Airman, even though he's faced open company, probably not coming out of any tougher races than the New York bred stakes that we've seen some of these horses compete in locally. And the other point I want to make about Tuskegee Airman and why I'm so bothered by the visual of that last race is he didn't do that in his debut. He was actually very professional in his debut race at Parks, coming through inside of horses, altering course, finishing up like a horse who had done it 10 times already. So to see that mental step backwards, that was the sticking point for me with Tuskegee Airman. Not that he can't win this race. He probably is the one to beat. I wanted to look elsewhere given what I saw last time. And you brought up Arctic Arrogance. I think in many ways he is the main rival because he's just been steadily coming along for Linda Rice. It's always noteworthy when Linda sends out a horse that wins on debut because that's really not something that is her MO. She doesn't train these horses to be ready to win their first starts, but he had trained so well up in Saratoga that he still took some money that day and got the job done. But I think he took a big step forward on the stretch out to a mile last time, Craig, because I liked the way that Jose Lezcano sort of let everybody else come back into the race as they approached the quarter pole on the turn. He actually got past a little bit after setting the pace, but once he set this horse down at the quarter pole, he displayed a really nice turn of foot to put that field away and win going away by over 4 lengths. It kind of said to me that a mile and an eighth might not be much of a stretch for him.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, he certainly looks to have the breeding to get the distance and everything I saw visually. He looked fine to me. For me, the horse that's a little bit problematic is the 3-horse. And when TimeformUS, the 3 horses prove right, by the way. When TimeformUS, he comes in with the best last race speed figure. If you're looking at our PPs, you'll note that he has the B for the breakout symbol. It was a race that was tough for me to make a speed figure. I haven't looked. If I had to guess, I would say Beyer probably has them significantly slower. It was probably a 15-point breakout. And it was just a really tough call for me. It was one where if I used the same variant for all the other races, most of the field would have taken significant regression from their prior races. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but it's a horse I have to use because it's not like it was a haphazard decision where I just took a shot in the dark. I did it the same way I always do. And at that 15-1 morning line, I'm going to take a shot that I'm right in here.
I was actually on the cusp of sending you one of my emails about that race, but I saw the speed figure, Craig, because I don't know. I don't see that race being that fast. It was the same day as the Tempted. I think the Tempted had a faster final time, and I kind of thought that probably was the stronger race. I know that some of the horses in the Nashua had run faster speed figures in the past. When I watched that Nashua, I frankly saw 3 horses that couldn't get the distance, and they all just fell apart at the end of that race. So I'm a little skeptical of relying on the faster number. And even if Prove Right did get the higher speed figure, he's still a horse that I don't really trust going the mile and an eighth distance. When I watch his races, it just seemed as more of a closing sprinter who was just kind of forward by default last time and faded. He's not for me, but he's going to be a big price in this race in all likelihood, so I don't want to be too negative on him. How about the horse that finished behind Arctic Arrogance last time in that Sleepy Hollow, Quick to Accuse? I wouldn't say that he had a major excuse that day because he was just second best to Arctic Arrogance, but he was a little bit wider on the track, and he is a horse that has been coming along with each start, taking a big step forward from first race to second race to third race. And when I look through the pedigrees in here, his is the one that really jumps out at me that says longer is better because he is the younger half-brother to one of my favorites, Mr. Buff.
I was a little torn on him. I wasn't sure which way to go. I do agree. I think the distance is going to help him. 4.5 lengths is a lot to make up, though. So I'm a little bit against him. And I have similar feelings about Midnight Trouble, who was the runner-up to Tuskegee Airmen, is also in this race. He's a little longer on your morning line at 8-1. It looks like he has speed figures that fit. He actually got the same speed figure once you do the weight adjustments and the pace adjustments as Tuskegee Airmen. But it's a little hard for me to see him turning the tables. I am a little curious of your take on the outside horse. I guess that's WNL is how you pronounce that. He has speed figures that fit with the others as well, which have to look at that last race was an off-the-turf race. It was in the slop. But I was actually impressed with what I saw that day, and he's one that I'm intrigued by.
Yeah, I'm guessing his name is W and L, like the 2 letters. I don't know. John Abriel's pronounced it differently in both of his races, and neither of them were that way, but I think that's the right way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I don't know, though. I'm not sure about that. But yeah, he's kind of a difficult horse to read because I thought he faced a pretty good field on debut. The horse that won that race, Instant Coffee, I think he's pretty good. He, of course, won the Kentucky Jockey Club last week at Churchill. And yeah, his last race, Craig, I wasn't sure what to make of it. Kind of like with that Tuskegee Airmen race we talked about. It seemed like he was spinning his wheels behind horses, taking slop in his face on the far turn. But once Jose Ortiz switched him out into the center of the racetrack and he had daylight in front of him, that's when he really kicked it in. And he did finish up that race to run down the leaders pretty impressively and was going away at the end. It's not a pedigree that says added distance is supposed to help. His Damn Wild Gams was a sprinter. She's produced really nothing but sprinters. He's a half brother to Cazadero, who is he started out as a good dirt sprinter, and now he's a turf sprinter. So he's kind of already run in contrast to that pedigree, and maybe he's taking more after that Curlin line of his sire, Good Magic. I'm not sure what to do with him here. I'm not going to be surprised if he runs well, but if he's going to be a similar price to a runner like Quick to Accuse, I wanted to go more in the direction of Quick to Accuse as my price horse, and I did make Quick to Accuse my top pick, and he's one that I do want to use heavily here, just because I think he's got that upward trajectory, and he really strikes me as one that's going to appreciate the distance. So I kind of lean towards the New York breds here, both of them. They're my top two picks, him and Arctic Arrogance.
Yeah, I can see that with the breeding. I did want to ask you, if you were to, you're much more of a breeding guy than me. Do you think it's fair to say that if horses are going to outrun their pedigree, it's most likely to happen when they're two?
That's interesting. Yes, I think horses kind of present very early if they're taking after their pedigree or not. Sometimes you could even see it physically, or even in the way that trainers who know the pedigree decide to manage them. I mean, you see many horses that Chad Brown gets into his stable that don't have a lot of turf pedigree, but he just looks at the horse and sees turf and runs it on the turf. So yeah, I think sometimes the pedigree comes through and sometimes it doesn't, and that often is apparent pretty early in a horse's career. And, maybe you don't want to put a whole lot of stock in the pedigree of a horse like that, like WNL, because he hasn't run to it so far. He doesn't have that sprinter speed. So we'll see. I think we'll learn a lot about these horses and their pedigrees when they get this real stamina test on Saturday. Let's move on to the next leg of this sequence, the Grade 3 Gopher Wand, going the same 1 mile trip as the Cigar Mile, which we'll talk about in just a bit. But this one is for the fillies and mares. And like we had said at the top of the podcast, probably one of the more competitive races in this sequence, at least among the stakes portion. Got a field of 11 signed on for this one. And it does seem like there's quite a bit of pace in this race, Craig. Not that any of these horses are like 6 furlong speedballs per se, but there are many that want to have forward position.
But before I get to the pace projector, I do want to give a little tip of the speed figure maker cap to the racing secretary for the way he carded this races, having both the 2-year-old races back to back and then both the 1-turn dirt miles back to back. So I, for one, do appreciate that. It can make things much easier on me than some other days. And of course, there's no turf races mixed in, which makes it even better. That said, as far as the pace projector goes, I totally agree with you. I think the pace is going to be pretty quick in here. It's the 1-turn dirt mile, of course, but we have a lot of horses who have a lot of sprints in their running lines, and they're also horses who have been up near the front. We have Battle Bling, who's your tepid morning line favorite, has won 3 in a row at longer distances, has been right up on the front, in front in 2 of them, and just off in the other. So I definitely think there's some speed, and you can see that just with a glance at the pace projector when you see Battle Bling is way back tied for 6th for who's going to be in the lead after the opening half mile.
Yeah, I mean, Battle Bling, I know we both kind of went against her a little bit. This is a race that we also talked about a little bit earlier when we did our video. But I don't want to knock her too much, Craig, even though she's going to be a short price in this race, because she is just so consistent. She shows up every time. If you start to scroll down through her PPs, I mean, she's been in the exacta in 9 of her last 10 starts, and the only time that she wasn't in the exacta during that time period was when they tried the Grade 1 La Troyenne, shipping her to Churchill. So, I mean, she just shows up and runs her race really regardless of the distance or the pace situation. She's got plenty of versatility. Even though she's been forward recently, she can come from off the pace. So I think she's definitely dangerous here, but there are others who have run comparable speed figures who probably are going to be slightly better prices. We should talk about the number 7 Dr. B, who is kind of the key to how fast this pace could be, because she's one that does like to run up close to the lead. Probably not a front runner, but she likes to press the pace, and she's coming out of some much faster paced sprint races. So we'll see how much she's going to press things on the front end, but she's definitely in great form right now. It's just a question of whether she can get that extra furlong.
Right, her last race when she was a good second behind Boston Post Road in the Pumpkin Pie Stakes, it was one where I thought it was her best race in a while, even though she didn't win. She's had a few wins mixed in. She was kind of getting back to her best speed figures. I'm glad that she didn't draw inside because I think that would be pretty tough on her with the early speed she has. I think she can kind of, her rider can see how things are going. Irad Ortiz, and we know he's not a guy who's very often intent on getting the lead. I think he's probably likely to sit second or third and see what he can do. But that could be a little bit dangerous for a horse who has never tried longer than 7 furlongs. She's likely to be pretty keyed up when the gate opens. Sprint speed's just different even than speed at the 1-turn mile. So I'm not totally sure what to do with her, but I do think she's in her best form and is dangerous in this spot.
Yeah, she's kind of an interesting horse to bring up with regard to the question that you posed earlier about when pedigree really comes through on a horse, because she's actually bred to go much longer than this. She's got nothing but route pedigree, but they've really just sprinted her so far. So maybe that says that she's really not meant to go longer distances. We'll see. I think we'll find out the answer on Saturday. Craig, I know that you and I are both interested in a couple of the New York breds in this race that faced off last time, that Iroquois Stakes. Bank Sting, I mean, kind of like Battle Bling. She's just so consistent. She always runs well. Doesn't always win, but she's right there at the finish. Loves to finish in the exacta, especially on the winning end. She just makes a lot of sense in this race.
She does, and as you pointed out on our video preview, I don't think the track was doing her any favors last time, and the same goes for Betsy Blue, who I assume we'll talk about next. So I'm willing to forgive that kind of regression speed figure-wise. She did run a good second in a race that had a solid pace. She was making up ground, but I just don't think she was fully cranked for that one. I'm almost wondering if this wasn't the goal all along for New York bred, and I just expect a much better race from her than last time. And it's not like she ran bad. I just don't think it was her best.
Yeah, I would agree with that. She does have that right to take a step forward here, and she's one that has proven that she handles the mile distance before, whereas that's more of a question for Betsy Blue, who was kind of co-favored with Bank Sting in that Iroquois last time and did finish just behind her. But when I go back and watch that race, I thought Betsy Blue is the one who had the tougher trip. I know that Bank Sting was wider, but Betsy Blue was trying to run through the kickback over what I thought was a speed-favoring course, and Jose Lezcano kind of angled her back down to the rail in the stretch, which I often don't love when a horse is trying to close, especially on the dirt. And she's got to get the mile, but she's one that's certainly bred to do it. She did handle a mile a very long time ago in like the third or fourth start of her career. So we'll see if she can still do it now, but she's finished up her 7 furlong races 2 and 3 back, like at a distance is not supposed to be a problem. And Linda Rice has her in good form. The Linda Rice barn in general has been in good form lately. So if she's around that 6-1 morning line, I'm going to be on board with her.
Yeah, I have no issue with her, and just the way she runs, particularly when you look at those races 2 and 3 back, I don't think the mile is going to be a problem for her, even at this later point. As you said, she handled it earlier on, but the way she was able to close into 2 races that both had plenty of blue fractions in them, meaning the pace was slow, and just really finish off those races and win easily, I just don't see the mile being an issue.
Yeah, and I should note with Bank Sting, she is also eligible for a race on Sunday at Aqueduct that is a New York bred race with a $125,000 purse for stallion horses sired by New York Stallions, which applies to her. And her connections didn't enter there. They're running here in this grade 3 instead. So I think that's a vote of confidence that they're choosing not to take the path of least resistance with Bank Sting. It's probably a good sign for her chances in this race. Craig, before we move on from the Gopher Wand, is there anybody else at bigger prices we should mention? I know we focused mostly on the horses that are single digits on the morning line. I know you had mild interest in WW Fitzy when we talked about this race earlier.
Yeah, I said with WW Fitzy, she certainly had the figures to win this race, just 2 races back. She's going to be a long shot in here, but you really have to just have faith that last race is a throwout because she just didn't do any running. As you've noted, the Tom Morley barn has been pretty darn cold since Saratoga. He had a good meet there, not so much in the Belmont at Aqueduct or now the Aqueduct meet. So she would be kind of a wild stretch for me. I guess the other horse we should mention is a horse drawn to the inside, Love in the Air, who if you ignore all the races on anything but dirt, she has a pretty imposing record, just doesn't really have the speed figures to match some of the others.
Yeah, and when you look at her pedigree, it's kind of surprising that she wound up on turf so much because her damn lovely Sin, some people might remember her. She was a very precocious and talented New York bred who went 4 for 4 in her career before it was cut short by injury. But her last race, lovely Sin, that damn, I mean, she had won the Bowery by, I think, more than 10 lengths with I think a stakes record time. I mean, she was an extremely fast New York bred sprinter on the dirt. So Love in the Air, I mean, I guess unsurprisingly, is more of a dirt horse. Her turf races are okay, but she's just been a pretty visually impressive winner of her last several dirt races. And when I initially was watching her replays and handicapping this field, kind of going from the rail out, I was thinking, oh, this is a really intriguing runner stepping up in class here. The race is probably a little bit tougher than I thought it might have come up, and I ended up going against her in here because she is just a little bit light on speed figures, but she's a horse who might be better than those figures indicate because she has been winning these dirt races pretty easily, and she hasn't gotten the kind of class test on dirt that she's facing here. So I wasn't sure what to do with her, and she's the kind of horse where I'd want to let price be my guide.
Yeah, and if I haven't been really clear on this, while the 10 Bang Sting would be my top pick if I had to make one, this is a race where I'll be using probably all the horses we talked about, all 6 of them, I believe, in one way or another, the different A, B, or C tiers. But I just think this is the most wide open race on the whole sequence.
Let's move on to the feature race on this card, the Grade 1 Cigar Mile Handicap. Grade 1, the last Grade 1 of the year in New York. Of course, going this 1-turn mile distance on the main track. And Craig, it's not the strongest edition of the Cigar Mile that we've ever seen. There are one horse that was entered that might have been a contender to some, the number 5 Obesos. He'll not be participating. There's a restriction on horses shipping out of Churchill there currently, so he's not able to come. And a couple of the runners that are entered in here for trainer Lynn Cash, I mean, I appreciate him always running horses in races, especially in New York recently, but they're a little bit hard to figure as contenders in this race, so it does kind of feel like it narrows down to 4 major players, and Zandon just seems like the one to beat. I mean, he is a 3-year-old stepping up against older company for the first time, but when you go through his recent running lines, I mean, he's been right there with horses like Taba, Cyberknife, Epicenter, all horses that would be odds-on favorites in a race like this, and maybe Zandon's just finally finding the right field.
Yeah, I agree. First off, hats off to Lynn Cash. I love this guy for running these horses like he does. Double Crown actually won the Kelso, so it's hard to totally dismiss them when they don't look good on paper. But in this particular race, I am dismissing both of them. I think you have to make it, for me, what I had to do was make a decision on Mind Control, who you have tabbed as the second choice. I don't particularly like him at all in this spot. I know he's a tough old warrior that wins a lot of races. I just can't see him beating Zandon. And I'm not even sure he could beat the other 3-year-old in here, White Abarrio, who I actually think is probably the main danger to Zandon. So for me, Zandon is going to be used pretty heavily on my tickets, and my backup would be White Abarrio, who comes out of that Pennsylvania Derby, which was a pretty darn good race. He was a little bit behind Zandon that day. The only reason I wouldn't single Zandon is the pace scenario, where I think White Abarrio might get a pretty good head start on him.
Yeah, the pace, I think, is the main concern for Zandon, but I don't know if I think it's going to be quite as slow or maybe favoring frontrunners as the pace projector indicates, because I'm interested to see what they do with Outlier, who, I mean, with Lynn Cash having 2 runners in here, and it seems like they have different running styles, I'm not going to be surprised if Outlier is in here to set a little bit of a pace. He's definitely a horse that, while maybe not recently, in the past, if you go back 6 or 7 races, he's shown quite a bit of early speed, including in some one-turn races. So I wouldn't be surprised if he gets ridden aggressively here. Not that I think that that's going to significantly affect White Abarrio, or especially not Mind Control, who's drawn outside of all of these runners and has a versatile running style. But I just wouldn't view this as some kind of walk in the park for White Abarrio. If people are thinking that he's going to easily wire this field. I mean, when I go back and watch that Pennsylvania Derby, it's it's just hard for me to pick White Abario over Zandon because I just thought Zandon ran so much better. He made that big move to get up into second before just kind of flattening out at the end. And I've always thought with Zandon that slightly shorter distances are going to work to his benefit. And I think the one-turn mile is just perfect for him. He's got this excellent turn of foot in his races. That's really his biggest weapon, but it kind of gets muted a little bit when you stretch him out to a mile and a quarter, sometimes even going the mile and an eighth distance. And I think the mile is going to work just perfectly. And if there's any pace whatsoever, he just strikes me as one that is going to get the right kind of setup here. So Zandon's my pick. He's a horse I'd lean on pretty heavily. Not that I think White Abario can't win, but he really does need to kind of put it together because his recent performances have been all over the place. And as for mind control, I want to like him in here because it's the last start of his career. He's been such a stalwart in these races for the past several seasons. And I mean, he's a horse that has won multiple grade ones on this circuit, and adding the Cigar Mile to that resume would just be pretty special for him. But it does seem like he'd have to find the kind of speed figure that's always eluded him throughout his career.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I hope he runs a good race, but the betting side of me just won't get me there. I just don't think he's fast enough. And just, I hope you didn't misunderstand me. I'm definitely leaning heavily on Zandon. I just think White Abario is the one logical alternative. I guess we should discuss Get Her Number a little bit before we head out of this race, because he actually comes in pretty good form, shipping in from the West Coast for Peter Miller. He beat a good horse in Ginobili last time in Forbidden Kingdom, who was on the Derby Trail a while back, a high-speed horse, set a slow pace. So I don't want to totally dismiss him, but I'm just wondering if he's really fast enough to compete with a horse like Zandon.
Yeah, he beat a really good field last time, as you said. That was probably the best race Get Her Number has ever run. So maybe he's coming in here in good form, and he's one that had kind of lost his form for a long time, going back to his 3-year-old season, but seems like now back in Peter Miller's barn, he's doing better. My issue is Peter Miller, some people might forget because he was, I guess, not technically not training for a while, technically. He hasn't shipped a horse to New York in the past year or so, definitely not in the past 12 months. But if you go back and look at his 5-year stats in Formulator with Naira runners, he's just 3 for 36, an 8% win rate with a 58-cent ROI. So his horses, even when they seem like they're in good form, they haven't brought that form shipping to New York. So I'm a little bit skeptical of him for that reason. I also think I might have gotten this morning line a little bit wrong, and he might drift up, whereas White Abario drifts down in price, just given that pace situation. So if you like Get Her Number, I mean, have at it, but he just wasn't for me here.
Yeah, same. I agree. I tried to make a case for him and just couldn't quite get there, even without that Peter Miller stat, which is good info.
Well, let's close things out with this starter allowance race that goes as race 10, 7 furlongs on the main track. And this is one that complicates things a little bit, Craig, because it's just not the easiest race to decipher. And hopefully you had some stronger opinions in the stakes, as I think we did, that started off this sequence, because this might be a spot you want to spread a little bit. A horse you have to make a decision about when you start handicapping this race is the number 3, Be the Boss, who kind of out of nowhere popped these big speed figures on the dirt, beginning back at Saratoga when he beat a much weaker field of 16,000 claimers, but did so in fast time and followed it up with another good effort at Aqueduct. But last time, first off the claim for Peter Walder, I didn't like that effort going a mile. Maybe turning back is going to wake him up again, but I've got some reservations with this horse.
Yeah, it's same for me. He kind of speed figure wise, he has triple digit speed figures the last 3 times. It doesn't look like he regressed that much when you look at just speed figures, but I agree with you. Visually, I think it's worse than what the numbers say. He gets a little boost, I think, because of being up close to a little bit of a quick pace, but I don't think he's any lock in here by any stretch. A horse that I'm intrigued by and kind of torn on is the one that's trying dirt for the first time for fairly newly returned trainer David Jacobson. He's a horse who ran a speed figure last time on turf, first off the claim. That was his best ever by quite a bit. So I'm curious what you think about his breeding and moving him over to the dirt.
Generally, I'm against these horses. the ones that are moving from turf to dirt that have these like sexy looking speed figures on the turf that are going to draw people in when they have to transfer that form to the dirt. I generally want horses going to the dirt that have to improve a little bit, that'll be better prices. We'll see how much money he takes in this race. Just from that standpoint, he wasn't really for me. And also looking at his pedigree, while he is by hard spun, kind of a versatile sire, on the dam side, it's really way more turf. The dam, I'm just looking it up for a sec because I wrote it down. The dam is a half-sister to this horse named Enterprising, who was a very good multiple stakes winner on the turf. And if you go deeper in the second generation, I think this is the family of Stravinsky, who is a very good turf sprinter / sire. For me, this is not a dirt pedigree, so he's not really for me in this race. I mean, there are some other horses that are somewhat intriguing, those making trainer switches. The number 4, Tenebris, is one that had run some bigger speed figures earlier in the year, maybe against slightly weaker at Tampa and Monmouth, and I'm guessing he was a private purchase because he's a change of owner and trainer coming into this race, but he's one that might be a good fit here, even though he's making his first start at NYRA.
Yeah, I have no problem with him. He's actually the horse that I made my second choice in here. He has speed figures to match. If you don't think the 3B, the boss, is going to run back to those triple digits, he fits right along with everybody else. He's in good form. He's won changing barns. So I've got no problem with him at all. He's one that would be on my tickets. The horse who I eventually wound up making my top pick is a horse right to his outside, the 5, Major Spin. Another one who seems to run in the 90s all the time, has good form, and is changing barns to Rudy Rodriguez, which he hasn't exactly been hot, but he's good with horses first off the claim. And what really stuck out to me was he's moving from the ice-cold barn of Tom Morley, which we alluded to early. So he was one that actually still ran pretty well for Tom Morley, so I'm expecting some improvement from him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to do with this horse. I found it odd that he took so little money to back. Maybe that had something to do with the fact that the barn was a little cold at that time. And he still ran well, as you said, to be third that day at this level. And last time I thought he put in a decent effort, just probably beaten by a better horse in that claiming race. And he is moving up off the claim for Rudy. But like you said, Rudy has not been winning at his typical rate. And if you go in Formulator, and I'm not going to quote the stats, I don't have them right in front of me, but I've done this recently. If you look at his numbers over the past 12 months and then restrict Rudy's numbers to the last 6 months, the difference is shocking, I'll say. I mean, it's like he's a completely different trainer. He has won with a few first off the claim recently, so maybe that stat is surviving a little bit the overall trends of the barn, but I'm just wary of runners from this barn currently. I picked kind of a weird horse in this race, Craig, and I'm interested to get your take on it. The number 1, Colloquy. I know he looks pretty slow on paper, especially in his recent races, but he's just kind of an odd entrant in this race for me because they claimed him for 25 last time off a seemingly poor effort when he lost as the 2-1 favorite, and now they're protecting him, starting him in the starter allowance race when on Cigar Mile day, you probably know it's going to come up a reasonably tough race, and they're taking a shot anyway with this horse that looks like he, based on his form, should be dropping for 14. So he's now first time gelding for this race. Maybe something's changed since that last race in the 2 months that he's been in the Horacio de Paz barn that makes them think that they're going to see a different horse this time. And, I was looking back in Formulator because I remembered Horacio de Paz, well, he doesn't have great numbers off the claim. A couple of years ago, he claimed a horse for these same owners that was coming out of a $25,000 claiming race. They moved up to a starter allowance race. I think the horse's name was Full Court Press, and won, causing an upset. And similar pattern here, and he's got some improved workouts coming in. I just think this horse has an interesting look to him, and if some pace develops, he's one that I think could come running late.
I couldn't quite make him my top pick, but I'm very interested in him. What I found it kind of odd, but I guess I shouldn't, because these dates they report for first-time gelding, they really don't mean a whole lot. This horse has been working out pretty steadily since October 23rd. I think it's pretty safe to assume the horse was gelded fairly shortly after being claimed, because there are no gaps in his workouts where he would have been gelded, I don't believe. So I assume maybe that was the plan with this horse, or maybe not, and they just got him and said we might as well geld him and see what to do with him. But he's been working out pretty good, and not just pretty well, working out well. I think he's improving each time out. So he's one that definitely caught my eye as one that doesn't look like he fits on paper, but if you do a little deeper dive, I think he becomes really interesting.
Yeah, and as for that gelding stuff, the date, I mean, I don't like them showing the date in the PPs because it's I think it is misleading to people. It's not the date the horse was gelded; it's the date that the gelding was reported, which is a completely different beast. I mean, I know you know that, Craig. I'm just explaining it to listeners because I think they sometimes get confused about that. And you'll often see the gelding reported on the day that entries are taken, and it doesn't mean that the horse was gelded 3 days before he's running. That's just when the report came in. Often these things are not reported in a timely fashion. So having that date in the PPs, it can be a little bit misleading. Just wanted to clarify that. I mean, I don't even think the horse all the way on the outside, the number 9 Gaslight, is totally impossible. He's a horse that once had ability for Brad Cox and seemed like he woke up off the layoff last time for these connections. This is a race that if you start going through runner by runner, you can make a case for a lot of horses in here, and I think it's a much more interesting race than it might appear at first glance.
Yeah, this is one when you introed this race, I believe you said, hopefully you had some pretty strong opinions early, because I think it's kind of tough to have them in here for exactly what you're saying. There's a lot of horses that could win, and that's why I'm kind of against the horse you mentioned, Be the Boss, and the horse I ask about, What a Dude, who are probably going to take some money in here. I think you have to draw the line somewhere. So for me, I'm going to use horses like the 4, the 5, and the 1 mostly as my main plays.
Well, that wraps up the handicapping portion of this sequence. Let's just briefly go back over the tickets that we could possibly make here, Craig. And, as you were alluding to with regard to that first leg, the Demoiselle, if you're playing the sequence, I imagine your strategy is to take a shot against Julia Shining.
Yeah, I would think so, because otherwise I think you're probably better off playing the pick 4. I haven't sat down and done the math, because I know the pick 5, I think anyway, it has a better takeout than the pick 4. But I'm one who's never interested in starting a pick 5 with a horse who's going to be a prohibitive favorite as a single. Because for one, they don't all win, and that's what's going to be the play for most people on those tickets. So if I were going to take a shot against, I would start it with Royal Spa, the other second-time starter who I mentioned from Rodolphe Brissett, and Affirmative Lady, the maiden, who I think is going to handle the stretch out. When I got to the Remsen, this one I have to use Prove Right, the horse. I know we disagree a little on the speed figure. He probably doesn't want to go this far, but as a 2-year-old who I think might be up pretty close, I have to take a shot at a big price. And the others I'm going to use are the 2 New York breds that you mentioned, Arctic Arrogance and Quick to Accuse. And I'll even use as more like a C horse that WNL. Assume we'll see what John Embriali says next time out. When I get to the Gopher Wand, this is one where I do think I'm going to spread a bit. As I said, my top choice would be Bank Sting. I like your horse Betsy Blue a little bit, but there are others I would want to use. Love's in the Air is one of them. Dr. B is another. Maybe even W.W. Fitzy, and I think it would be foolish just to eliminate Battle Bling just because she's the morning line favorite, because she certainly has a decent shot to win this race. In the Cigar Mile, that's one where I'm definitely going to narrow things down quite a bit. I would assume I'm going to use Zandon, probably 90% of my play. The only other horse I'd really consider is White Abarrio. None of the others are in here for me. I'm dismissing Mind Control. If he wins, good. It'll be a good story for horse racing, but he's not going to be on my tickets. And then we just wrapped up that starter allowance to close it out. Most of my play is going to go through those 3 horses I talked about, the 4 Tenebris, Major Spin, and the 1 Colloquy, I guess it is.
Yeah, Craig, we differ a little bit in this sequence, I guess mostly in the places that we're putting emphasis, and I probably will play this pick 5. I mean, you're wise to bring up the takeout, because it's a point that we probably should bring up more often, the difference between the pick 4 and pick 5 takeout at different tracks. At Naira, it's quite stark. The pick 4 is the highest takeout wager, and the pick 5 is the lowest takeout wager, and pick 4 is a 24% takeout, and the pick 5 is 15. So that does give some incentive to play the pick 5 over the pick 4 if you can put some kind of ticket together. I would lean on Julia Shining and the Demoiselle. I don't love leaning on short prices that are obvious, but she just feels like she's probably found the right field for this race. And if I was going to use a backup, it would be horses like bigger prices on La Vida Sofia and Affirmative Lady, but they'd be distant backups where I really have to be right in the other legs. Moving on to the Remsen, I like the 2 New York breds, and I'm going to give preference to the bigger price of Quick to Accuse, but I would use both of them, Arctic Arrogance as well, probably an equal strength. Not that I'm against Tuskegee Airman, but I just think he could be an underlay in this race, so I wanted to de-emphasize him just a little bit. Maybe I'd have W and L as a backup, but wanted to mostly go in the direction of those New York breds. For me, the Gopher Wand would be a little bit of a spread race. I like Betsy Blue as my top pick, but also use Bank Sting, not against Battle Bling or Dr. B. I want to have both of them in my tickets. I'm probably even liking Dr. B a little more. And even the horse Craig mentioned, Love in the Air, I mean, I want to have her as a backup. So I probably have to go 5 deep on different tickets in that Gopher Wand. Moving on to the Cigar Mile, I'd have most of my play going through Zandon. Nothing too clever here. I just think it's really hard to see past him in this race for me. A little bit of White Barrio, a little bit of mind control, but I want to, if I'm right in the other legs, I want to rely on Zandon in the Cigar Mile. And moving on to that starter allowance that closes things out, I made Colloquy my top pick. I just think he's a really intriguing horse in this race that might fly under the radar for a lot of handicappers. I like Tenebris, the number 4, a little bit. I just think he fits pretty well in here, going out for the new connections. And even at a bigger price, the number 9, Gaslight, I think he's one that I would want to use as sort of a B in this race, a backup. I'd have to see how bloated my ticket is getting if I want to throw in horses like Major Spin or even like Be the Boss, who I think could be an underlay. But if there's a ticket where I have a bigger price and another leg, maybe I'd throw him in. But kind of looking back on how I put this sequence together, maybe not. Be the Boss is the kind of horse that I might leave out completely because this is the race where I like a price the best. And you do want to rely on those horses when you have good opinions on those that you think will be value.
Yeah, before we close out, I think you make a good point on Be the Boss. We're two guys that often talk about horses with improving speed figures. We don't often talk about horses with declining ones. And I think Be the Boss is one of those traps where he took a small step back last time, but more often than not, a horse like that, particularly when it doesn't match the visual, is going to take an even bigger regression next time. So he's one I would be against.
Well, that's it for our Cigar Mile Day handicapping. Hopefully we gave out some good ideas and help you hit this sequence on Saturday. That's going to wrap it up once again for Craig and I for a few weeks. We just came out of our hiatus for this one day, but we'll kind of go back into hibernation for a little while until probably around the holidays towards the end of December. And we'll get back to our regular schedule in 2023. I'll be taking a little bit of vacation towards the end of the month. So kind of leading into that, Craig and I are going to lay low with these podcasts for a little while, but you can expect the 2-day per week pacecast and forecast to start coming out regularly in early January.
Yeah, we're still doing a couple videos most of the weeks out there like we did today. You can find those on DRF.com, on the YouTube channel where we take a couple of the races off of Dan Illman and Mike Beer's hands and knock those out. So it's not like we're totally away from the game, just a slower time of the year and taking a little bit of a break. And I'm sure at some point we'll also do an Eclipse Award show. We'll kind of warn you about that so the people who don't care about Eclipse Awards don't have to listen, but I know there's plenty that do have interest, so I always think that's a fun show as well.
Yeah, and based on some of your Twitter commentary, I think we might have some different opinions in a few of those categories, Craig, so I can't miss an opportunity to debate those with you. We'll have to schedule that at some point, maybe after we cast our ballots at the beginning of January. But yes, we'll put out more information about that later this month. But everybody, for now, thanks for listening to this edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. If you want to catch this episode or any ones that we recorded in the past, just head on over to DRF's YouTube channel where you can see the archive of all of these. Also, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or even DRF.com. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Everybody, thanks for listening this week, and we'll notify you when we release the next TimeformUS Pacecast in about a month's time.